it's the community hospital right in the middle of the city. So it's got quite an array of folks coming in through their ER. And I found myself there one Friday night, and I was about 32 years old, doing well, married, in a great job, and I didn't know who I was, and I was behaving like a 5-year-old. And as my husband likes to say, I was like the belle of the ball at Denver Health in terms of looking and acting legitimately out of my mind.
We all want to improve our lives, but sometimes it's hard to know where to start. Join us each week on the Stacking Habits podcast with your hosts, David, Matthew, and Caleb, as we uncover life-changing habits from inspiring people. Want to know the best part? You can then apply those habits to enrich your own life and move closer to your goals.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Stacking Habits podcast. We have a very special guest here today, Audrey Wyman, who is a consultant and mental health advocate based here in Denver, Colorado. She spent over a decade in the healthcare industry working with organizations to help them integrate technology to improve client relations and services. And she and I connected in sort of a surprising way. She sort of has a side hustle working with a well-known artist here in Denver, Colorado named Pat Milbury. And she and I connected a few months ago, and happy to have her on. Welcome, Audrey.
Good to be here. I'm very, very glad.
Awesome. So one thing I didn't mention is that you have 2 young twins.
I do. I am a mother of 4-year-olds. I have a boy and a girl, and I'm strategically showing the upper half of my house. If we looked at the floor, you would see like little boy underwear and dinosaurs and Legos and all of the reality of what it looks like to have a house with 2 4-year-olds running around like crazy dragons.
That's so crazy. So for the last couple of years, I'm guessing they're in school now.
They are, yes.
Okay. So how did you manage juggling all the different work that you have with having 2 toddlers in the house?
It was a hot mess. I had them in 2019. And I don't know if you remember, but in 2020, there was a global pandemic that kind of turned everything upside down, and went from, we found them a really nice Montessori school. They were in Montessori school. I was getting ready to go back to my job, and my job changed on me. So I came back from maternity leave and was told I was in a new position. My position had been eliminated. And then the pandemic happened. So I was in a new position in a product role, acting as a scrum master, and I couldn't take my kids to daycare. So we were still paying for them to be in daycare and have their spots because we wanted to support the teachers and like pray, please keep our spot, while also having to work full time in a new position from our tiny house. So it was.
It sounds like a lot to juggle. Now, the habit that we're talking about today, well, the habits cumulative, it's really around dedication to self, really investing in yourself. And that seems to tie in with your work with mental health. I know you run workshops on burnout. So what got you interested in the mental health space in the first place?
Well, I have been I think it's my own journey. I think that's really what brought us in. I have been a bit of an investigator of mental health. I've gone to therapy a couple times, but actually there was a pretty intense scenario that happened to me prior to kids, where I landed in Denver Health. I don't know if any listeners are Denver natives, but Denver Health is the kind of like it's the community hospital right in the middle of the city. So it's got quite an array of folks coming in through their ER, and I found myself there one Friday night, and I was about 32 years old, doing well, married, in a great job, and I didn't know who I was, and I was behaving like a 5-year-old. And as my husband likes to say, I was like the belle of the ball at Denver Health in terms of looking and acting legitimately out of my mind. So yeah, we'll just dive in right there. I started hot. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Now.
I was gonna say, I feel like we've got our hook. We typically try to find a good
That's it.
intro. Yeah. So were you able to investigate? Did you figure out what the cause was?
Yeah, so essentially, I'd been working for a new company. I just started a new job in Boulder with a startup there. And I was, if I may like pat myself on the back a little, I was kicking ass. I was just doing really well and getting a ton of praise. So my husband and I had just come back from our honeymoon. I had this new job to come back to. And we were working on getting a lot of customers live. So you guys, from that world know how important like time to getting live is really critical. I reduced our implementation time. I'd brought more customers live than many other of my peers and was kind of putting processes in place to help us scale. And I started working like a little bit later hours. I'm like, I'm able to do it. I got the free time. Like, I don't have kids. Like, I was happy to work till like 8, 9 at night. And then I started bringing work home, working late at home, and found myself one day, maybe a little bit lack of sleep. So that's the big cue for me. But it turns out if you sleep very, very little, and you happen to caffeinate yourself and take Adderall. I also have ADD, so Adderall is kind of a ugly hack in this way where it can get you through on lack of sleep. But if you don't sleep 3 days in a row and try to show up to work, you will start talking about Game of Thrones and be invited by your boss to gently leave. And that's what happened to me that day. So
Gently leave as in be fired or just go home and sleep?
it wasn't even my boss telling me that. Another friend saw me behaving so erratically. His name is Eben. If he listens to this, Eben, you are the love, just the kindness that you showed me that day. He took me on a walk. I apparently talked about Game of Thrones in this really intense way for like a half hour. And he was gently like told my boss, like, hey, I think Audrey needs a break. And my boss was like, yeah, you're good. And I apparently left. I don't recall any of this. I was very blacked out, but I got myself to a train station in Boulder, took a train from Boulder to Denver Union Station, which is about half an hour walk to my house. Somehow I walked to my house. I don't know what that walk was like. But when my husband found me, I was behaving like a 5-year-old in our house and wasn't sure who I was asking a ton of questions that made him super skeptical and frightened, and was really, really frightened him. I think for the first time, like it was the most intense thing he'd ever been through to see me, this person he loved and just married, like, oh my God, where is she? Audrey's not here. This is someone else.
Yeah, that's got to be so scary.
Yeah.
What did the recovery look like? And I guess, did that prompt you to implement any changes into your lifestyle?
So I kind of woke up. They essentially took me to Denver Health, at the prompting of a friend of mine who's a nurse. My husband was wise enough to call our friends who was practicing, clinician. And she said, is she having a stroke? We did the test and I wasn't exhibiting stroke symptoms. So she said, you know what, Justin, you seem really stressed. I'm going to send Kevin over. She sent her husband, and the two of them drove me to Denver Health. So I had like a little team of people leaning in, taking care of me that night. And they gave me a drug test because they administered all the standards of care, like made sure that there wasn't substances in my system. There was not. They pumped me full of a bunch of IVs of just liquids to hydrate me and let me literally sleep it off and sent me home. And waking up the next day and realizing like, oh my gosh, I don't know what happened and I don't know why, was incredibly frightening. Like I I was in a place where I didn't trust myself. And I don't know if you guys have ever been in that kind of situation where you're like, I'm usually a very controlled person, and I didn't trust my own brain. Was totally freaked out about it.
So did you raise the flag at this point and say, "Hey, I need help," or are you still like being stubborn and saying, "Okay, this is just a one-off thing. I'm probably fine. Let me just get back to the hustle." Like what was your mentality at this point, and how did you actually, sort of raise that flag and say, "Hey, I think I need help."
So I was very afraid about a couple things. One of the things was bipolar. I was acting pretty manic during that time. I was like up late writing. I have a lot of weird writing. Also, if you happen to be my friend on LinkedIn from like 2017, I was definitely like seeing messages in LinkedIn. I thought LinkedIn was like telling me something, and I like, thank God I'm not in any other social media, but I got a lot of LinkedIn friends that night. So I was really worried about schizophrenia and bipolar. And so what I wanted to do was I went to my therapist. I talked to my like general practitioner doctor, and I wanted to rule things out. Like I wanted them to say, "You're okay," or like, "Oh gosh, Audrey, we think you have bipolar. We think you may be schizophrenic." And I wanted very much to not talk about so much what happened because it had been so terribly frightening, particularly that scene at Denver Health. And when my therapist was like, "Do you want to go back and revisit it?" I was like, "Nope, I'm good. I just want some strategies to move forward and make sure that never happens again, because I can't do that to my husband. I can't do that to myself." That was so frightening and scary, and not fair to any of the people in my life that I am responsible for, showing up and being accountable to.
Well,
Yeah, sorry guys. I brought it heavy this morning. Were you
no,
expecting that?
this is great. Well, I think it's something that needs to be talked about. I know COVID's really helped people be a lot more comfortable, and I know a lot of people have been brave and stepped up. We came from the entrepreneurial world, from the software world, and burnout can definitely happen. And the hustle mentality, Gary Vee preaches it. I know he's stepped it back a bit, but so many of our friends, and I think we've done it too as entrepreneurs, we wear that on our sleeve and say, "Yeah, we're just hustling hard, and I'm working 12-hour days." And we wear this as a badge of honor when in reality, we're just burning out our energy source, and we're just going to be depleted and not able to show up for the world in the way that we need to. So I think this is definitely something that needs to be talked about. It's really easy to talk about wins and successes and money, but this is really a strong foundation that is worthy of talking about. So thank you.
Absolutely. One thing I'll add to that too, Caleb, is, I think as people are sort of swinging to the other side of the pendulum where, before it was like hustle, 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 work really hard. And now it's like really focusing on self. And, I guess to you guys, I'll open it up to all of you guys, like in your mind, what does a good balance look like, and what sort of tools or, levers can you use to really make sure that you're balanced? Because you can't just sit there and be super self-reflective all the time. Like we have to work and make a living to sustain ourselves. So how do you find that balance?
I think balance is a tricky word because you can't ever be balanced all the time. And let me explain why. I think most things are pendulums. So if you're going to work, like for me, it's important to time box or to put things down. I've got a stand timer. And if I'm not doing a podcast, I'll usually have that going. It's 45 minutes. And when that's done, I try and focus in. So the balance is work really focused for a period of time and then check out and go do some other things and make sure I'm walking around and taking care of my body and drinking water. So the idea of balance, as in work a little, play a little, be with your family a little. I think you just need to be fully present at any given time. So that's my knock on the word balance. Audrey, I'm a twin as well.
Oh, you are? Do you have a twin brother or sister?
I do. We are fraternal, so I know yours are fraternal as well. I'm sure you get asked a lot if they're identical, which is impossible with male and female. But
That's a really cute question when people ask it, isn't it?
I know it's that like you don't understand how this works. But I'm curious: are they like partners in crime, or do they just spar and fight all the time?
Oh, they're like, I was like hoping they'd be so sweet to each other when they were little, and they were like arguably demons to each other. Like I was like, where did these two come from? Hitting each other, fighting. They have just recently turned the corner and like plot against me together. They're also
Yes.
learning Spanish and they know more Spanish than my husband or I. And so like that is their language and they can like, they're beginning to converse and plot in other languages against me.
Well, that'll be a good motivation to pick up Spanish quicker for you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And by the
Um,
way, Caleb, I know this is like a really personal story, but I told David as well, like, I'm kind of an open book, so feel really welcome to ask me questions. If it's something intense and I feel like I don't want to answer it, I'll just tell you. But
Perfect.
I really like people asking because I think people's questions, if you have a question, probably other people do too. So
Yeah,
I'm very happy to talk.
we'll try and follow our curiosity, and I appreciate that invitation.
Yeah.
One more thing on the twin scenario. So my twin and I obviously grew up together. We have a brother 18 months younger, so there's three of us within a year and a half. And just like your twins kind of fighting, it was always two of us against the other. We almost never always teamed up together. It was always two against one, and that would rotate around depending on the day, the moon cycle, whether it was sports or academics or music or you name it. But it's crazy because I loved having someone to share life with. Every time you go to a new situation, whether it's driver's ed or a play practice or whatever it is, I always had a wingman next to me. So they're lucky. I know they may spar and battle and team up on you over the time, but it's pretty incredible to have that growing up with, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.
I love hearing stories like that. Thank you for sharing that. Also, I want to give your mom a hug. She is, I believe that twin parents are superheroes, and she had another one I can't fathom. I
how
cannot
many
fathom.
kids total, Caleb?
Well, I'm one of seven, so yeah,
Oh,
she's owed a
wow.
lot of love.
Yeah, superhero. She's like in another class. Like
Well, she'll be swinging down tomorrow for like an early Thanksgiving, so I will give her a random hug from Audrey in Colorado.
yeah,
We'll see how that goes.
please do. I would like that very much.
Um, well, so Caleb, you just wrapped up talking about finding balance, and you were talking about the time box method. Audrey, what do you think about this whole concept of balance? And I'm sure you've thought of it.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's very tricky. I think it's very, very tricky for women and moms. I think we've been fed a giant lie about you can have it all. It's true, you can do it. And I will tell you that every woman I know that I've ever worked with that has a family, if I have the relationship where that person can be honest, they will always tell me I feel torn. I feel torn between my family and my career. And so that was really instrumental in kind of my career downshift. I was, we'll call it a happy accident, let go from a company in 2021. And my husband was like, gosh, Audrey, it's really helpful having you, around the house. And this is still in the middle of COVID. And if there's an outbreak at school or we got to go get the kids and be at home for 10 days together again, you can kind of be the default parent. So I just fell into that role and have found it really affirming and helpful to have a little bit more of that flexibility. And I'm not knocking women that I think that I applaud women who work, women who stay home. I think all of it is hard. There's no good solution, unfortunately. I think that the balance is something that I think it's something that you really have to own and figure out for yourself, because I think balance looks really different for different people.
I know one of the things that you were talking about in our pre-call was your utilization of the 5 gears framework.
Oh,
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I feel like it ties in really well with this.
oh, you bet. So this is a framework that I learned from Jeremy Kubicek and Steve Cochran. They were former clients of mine. They work for an organization called Giant, and they developed this really brilliant framework to help people understand the different modes of being. So this is actually quite fun to talk through, and I want you guys to be thinking about what gear is your kind of default gear. So first gear is rest, recharge. So this could look like sleeping. This could look like reading, working out, reading a book, whatever makes you feel recharged and rejuvenated. For my husband, he likes to run up mountains because he's crazy, but that's how he recharges. So that's first gear. Second gear is connecting intimately. So we're in second gear right now. It's hard to be in second gear with more than probably 5 people, but you can think of second gear as like an intimate connection, like what we would do over a dinner, meeting a friend for coffee, sitting in an Uber, perhaps if you're me. So that's second gear. Third gear
When you say
is
more than 5 people, sorry to interrupt, are you saying 5 people at a time, like a conversation, or 5 people just spread out in your life at any given time?
Oh, it's hard to be, if there's 5 people, you're probably in third gear.
Okay,
There's a different way to put it. So
sure.
second gear, you can be in second gear with up to 5 people at once.
Got it.
But really good lead in. Thank you, Caleb. So if you're in more of a third gear, that looks like networking events, barbecues, happy hour, anything that's more of like a social hang. So you're connecting with people, you're out and about, but that's gear number 3. Gear number 4 is when you're multitasking. I'll do it this way. Gear 4 is when you're multitasking and doing multiple things at once. So I will share that our society is almost chronically in gear 4. As Americans, we are usually checking our emails while we're in a meeting, have our phone there, maybe there's a text, maybe there's like 4 different conversations going on and we're like half paying attention. And then gear 5 is when you are hyper focused. So focused that someone has to say like, Caleb, yo, Caleb,
What?
like
Where?
get your attention, pull you out of your flow state. So those are the 5 gears. I gave you a very quick overview. I'm curious, what is your default gear?
And by default, do you mean like what gear do we find ourselves in most often? Or
It
for
could
like,
be
I guess, duration?
Or which one do we recover with? Like what?
yes. Yeah, good. You guys are asking really good questions because I think those are all things to think about. I'm curious, what gear are you most naturally in? What gear is you just kind of fall into without really trying? There's usually one that kind of has a gravity to it and pulls us in.
And are these in a specific order? So just to recap, I've got a few notes in front of me, make sure I got them. But rest,
Yeah.
so pretty much by yourself. Connection,
Mm-hmm.
something intimate with 1 or 2 or 3 people. Fun,
Mm-hmm.
more of just social activities. What was the fourth
Networking.
one?
Fourth is multitasking.
So distraction, ADD, and then the last state was the flow state where you're just completely locked in.
Yeah, like a hyper focus.
Okay, and is there an order to those? Is this like an
Um,
order of importance or anything, or is it just kind of random 5?
I'd want to ask the people who created it. I think it goes from like, in terms of, I think every gear has a purpose, but you can kind of think of like shifting up as like turning on more.
Sure.
But for different people, there's different gear orders. So I'll share my default gear. You may have guessed it probably. It's really easy for me to go to gear 2. I love connection. It doesn't exhaust me. It's quite helpful and restorative to me. So I gravitate towards gear 2. But I probably I haven't thought about my gear order for a while, but we could go through and think about like what order we land in. So
Yeah, it's
no, there's not a
interesting.
particular order. We all have probably a different default. So I'm
Can
David's
I
gear.
guess at yours, David?
Yeah, sure.
And then maybe vice versa. When I see you, David, I think fun. Like gear 3 just naturally makes sense. You are extroverted most of the time. Sometimes you'll pull it back, and I really see connection maybe as number 1, but maybe a really close number 2, because you are really good at seeing people and digging into their lives and really just making them feel special. So I see you in the fun state a lot. You really thrive. You do a good job pulling people in. And then I think you really shine in some of those more intimate conversations. How does that resonate with you?
I'm flattered, and I like the idea of fun being my default state. I'm all for that. What I will say is, if I'm being just completely candid, I that first gear of rest really resonates with me, because for me, like, there's nothing better than a Saturday or Sunday where I wake up, on my own schedule, and I, make some tea or coffee, make some breakfast, and I just sit down. Maybe I'm reading some newsletters or watching a YouTube video, and just like that is my state of rest. And like, I guess maybe how it resonates with me, it's like my body calling for it. Maybe like my body's like telling me, hey, David, you need to slow down. You need to stop like packing your schedule with so much stuff. But yeah, I would definitely say like, as far as, well, but here's the other thing. I'd say the multitasking, like, it sounds less appealing for me, although I do find myself, you know, watching Netflix with Instagram on the side constantly. But like, all these different gears sound really appealing to me. Like, I love it when I'm able to get into flow state. Admittedly, not as much as uh, you know, I should be, but like, just like being able to focus in, knock out work or knock out a project. I love that. Multitasking in successful way. That's great too. Obviously, fun and connection are great, but like, I think for me, rest, it just resonates real hard. Caleb, do you want me to
Yeah.
take a stab at
You can. I'm glad you picked one because I could just see you lighting up and saying, I love all of these. This is fantastic. So rest is where you love being the most. That's your home, you would say.
It's definitely my home. I would say I don't really believe in labels, introvert, extrovert, because here's the thing, is like I love connecting with people, both in smaller groups like one-on-one and in larger groups. I'm actually coordinating my one of my high school like smaller groups like reunion next week, and so I love that, like the idea of like bringing people together, having a great time, like that's where I feel like I shine. But for me, rest is so important because like I do feel burnt out at times. I think all of us do. And yeah, so I'd say like if I were a Roomba, yeah, I really shine when I'm cleaning the entire house, but I definitely need to be docked back up to charge. I don't know if that's a weird
Packing back out.
analogy, but
That's
Charge.
that's a beautiful image. I love it.
yeah.
All right,
You
take
took
Um,
a take a stab.
of gear one. So thank you for talking about what your Saturday, Sunday morning looks like, because I think it's not just sleep. Rest can look different for all of us. So thank you for sharing that.
yeah, absolutely. Caleb, I feel like your top gear is connection, whether it's with your family and all your kids now, or whether it's with us. We connect several times a week, or like we were just talking about your dinner with one of our old competitors in the software space. And so just like being able to connect one on one, or even just in a small group setting, I think that's probably where you shine. And then from there, this is just my view outside looking in. I feel like you're really good at getting into flow and just like dialing in and just focusing on one task. And so I'd say like you're either connecting or you're just like in flow mode and you're just in it and just doing whatever needs to be done. Multitasking, I feel like, yeah, you can definitely do it. I'm sure you have fun doing it at times. And then fun, obviously, we had that huge bash earlier this year. That was a lot of fun. You coordinated that, and so you obviously have passion for that. And then rest, I don't know, maybe you're never in gear one, because I never like, you're like, oh, hey, I went to San Diego, I went to Florida, I was in Dubai, I connected with these people, I'm doing this project. So I don't know if you ever get any rest, but that's probably not true.
I do. And real quick, we'll turn the spotlight back on Audrey here, but I think you're pretty close. Connection is definitely where I feel the most energy. I love to dig deeper. I call it nudging or disrupting. I try and just push a little bit on some of the social norms and ask those deeper questions. And some people get defensive. I used to get defensive, but I love just trying to prod a little bit and get to know someone on a deeper level and get to know some of their fears or anxieties or what gets them most excited. So I think you're pretty spot on there. I wish I could be in flow state more often. That is something I've really had to push hard at. If I find a great problem to solve, then sure, I'm there. And I think you're right. Rest is probably on the bottom. Although I have a pretty good morning routine now. I get up, I make like a mushroom coffee latte thing. I go sit in the hot tub every morning. It's me and the deer and my puppy. All the girls in the house like to sleep in a little bit, so I have the first 30 minutes to an hour of the day just to myself, and I kind of just think through what I'm going to do that day and just enjoy being out in the sunshine. And we've got some beautiful trees in our backyard, so that's where I get my rests. That usually recharges me, and I'm ready to go.
That's your
Audrey,
Roomba docking station.
I'll do like the docking station. Yep.
Yeah.
Audrey, turning the spotlight back on you, I love this concept of 5 gears. That just got a really good ring to it. When did you discover this? And was this sort of a useful tool in pulling you out of that funk that you were in back in 2019?
Such a great pullback because it's super relevant. And I'm going to ask you guys another question
Okay.
that kind of gets us to the end of the net of my story. But it's also, I think we've kind of discovered that all of these gears have utility. There's not like a good gear or a bad gear. There's all utility. For example, you guys are talking about gear number 3. Gear number 3 is where you build trust, for example. So when you're with a client, trust is built in gear number 3 so that you can get to that like gear number 2, more intimate. So there's utility and there's a purpose between every gear. And we often, I think, I often find myself in the wrong gear at the wrong time. And since I've started thinking about this, I am able to more quickly identify when I'm doing that. But here's a bonus question that'll take us to the next level is, what gear do you go to when you're stressed? And I'll ask both of you, and then we'll come back to mine, which will kind of tell the end of my story.
It's kind of an Enneagram question. What are you when you're healthy, and what do you do when you're stressed?
Oh, you're a student of the Enneagram. We'll talk about that, Kate.
I scratch the surface.
I'm into it.
Scratch the surface. I'm a type 7 for sure. I would say when I'm not in a healthy space, multitasking is what pops up. There's a lot of studies. You can't really multitask, but I tend to not be fully present in the moment. I would love flow state. David, thanks for seeing me that way as one of my higher strengths. But I tend to be distracted to chase shiny. And so that's probably where I go when I do get distracted and stressed, is I kind of default to that state because there's a sense of urgency and anxiety that I have to just accomplish something. How about you, David?
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. But with a slight twist, I feel like it's multitasking disguised as rest. And so when I find myself in really stressful situations, I feel that I'm doing the same thing, right? I'm waking up on Saturday, Sunday, slow morning, making breakfast, and just really, outwardly it looks identical, but I think inwardly, my mind is just racing. And yeah, you just start getting really tired even though you're resting and you're not really doing much. And so, yeah, I would say it's definitely multitasking too, but maybe disguised as rest, right? Yeah, it's a great question.
Super self-aware. I like that I think we can trick ourselves sometimes about what we're up to when we think we're resting.
Audrey, where do you go when you are stressed out?
So when I am really, really stressed out, like my worst self, for whatever reason, my wiring kicks me into 5. I just go like, I need to work harder. And I get like really passionate, really focused. I'm that person that will be on my computer late at night scrolling or just want to get something done, one more thing done. If I just get one more thing done, then I can rest. And I just kick up into that 5th gear. And what's really interesting is that I was learning this framework from my clients at Giant back in 2017 when I landed in Denver Health. And coming out of that experience, I realized, oh my gosh, I was just in 5th gear when I needed to be in gear number 1. And so what the framework has allowed me to do is think more critically about, okay, if you can notice that you're in that stressed stage, that you're probably in the wrong gear at the wrong time, what is the gear that you desperately need? And for me, if I ranked all of my gears in order, 1 is my last. I have always had a difficult relationship with sleep. and rest in general. And I think I am learning since then to have a better relationship with that particular gear and what it means, what it looks like for me, and trying to find ways to get myself into it. So I'm curious if you guys have a gear that doesn't come naturally, or a gear that you need to work at to really get into.
Yeah, before we jump in there, let me prod a little bit
Mm,
with a few more follow-up questions. So
please.
you mentioned flow state or really focused is where you go to when you are, feeling stressed or maybe not your best, healthiest self. It sounds though like that actually serves you a bit. So do you find that getting into flow state, that's where you're going to probably do your best work? There's a ton of research on psychology as it relates to sports, as it relates to performance. Flow state is sort of where we want to be. So does that actually serve you? And then you just have to kind of check in and make sure you don't overextend yourself in that gear.
Oh, it totally served me until it didn't. You're exactly right. I think I was, when I had my nervous breakdown, or my dear friend Carrie, who leads workshops with me, would remind me to call it an acute stress response. When I had my acute stress response, I was being lauded. I was being congratulated. I was hyper efficient at work, and everyone was looking to me and applauding me. And there was this environment, and I don't think it wasn't people being nefarious or cruel or bad, but they were just applauding someone working really hard and getting a lot done. So we kind of, I think, really do value that gear, and it's a desirable one to be in. It's kind of, there can be like healthy flow states for me, but if it's 2 a.m. and I'm in hyper focus, that is not a happy day for Audrey, and you can better believe that the next day is going to be real bad for me.
Yeah. So you mentioned you stayed up for 3 days straight. I'm assuming you're not exaggerating. You actually didn't sleep for 3 days straight.
I probably got between 45 minutes to maybe 2 hours each night. Like there was a time of night where I was laid my head on a pillow and was like, crap, I got to get the bus in 2 hours. I'm going to just lay in my bed and try to sleep. But yeah, I was up for basically 3 days straight.
Wow. So I'm going to put a pin right here in this moment. My 12-year-old likes to say that she doesn't need any sleep and she likes to burn the candle at both ends. And she's like, I don't need to sleep. I could stay up several days. So I'm going to put a pin right here, show her this clip and say, hey, here's somebody, an expert in this field. And she's saying sleep is important. So that's my takeaway. Obviously 3 days is much too long. So when you mentioned this 5 years framework and checking in, my first thought was this is maybe an exercise you do every Sunday, but it sounds like it's something that you do more in real time. So is this something that's constantly at the forefront of your brain?
Yeah, I think about it. Good question. It's so funny. David asked me to think about my habits, and I was like, and it's kind of hard to acknowledge your habits because they're just automatic, and it's become automatic for me. And one of the things I like to do is think about my day and identify what gears I want to be in during that day, for different parts of it. So I knew when I was going to connect with you guys, I was like, okay, get ready for two. This is my jam. I'm pumped. I'm set. But I think the way that I think about the gears is bringing intentionality to what gear to be in at the right time. Like if I'm in a meeting, I definitely want to like put my phone down, turn it off, silence it. I don't want to be even kind of tempted to, get a notification and just like peek at it. So I think it's a activity that I do almost automatically now, where I know the gear that I want to be in. For example, dinner with my family, like that's kind of sacred time for me. So we talk about it with my kids, like, hey, this is focus time. But there's also times when Bluey's on and I'm working and also cleaning and grabbing the laundry and putting it in the dryer.
There's totally
Audrey,
times where multitasking makes sense. Go ahead, David.
Audrey, I'm such a firm believer in environment shaping behavior, and I think it applies in all things in life. Like at our workplace, we created the entire flow of the warehouse to support certain types of behaviors from the employees, like not like weird behaviors, but like remembering to clock in and clock out, like, just being intentional with where we put the time clock machine, for example. And you brought up something interesting. You said, hey, as I was getting ready for gear 2, I made my tea. I silenced my phone, put it on do not disturb. I know we talked about how you moved your phone away, the charger away from your bed. So again, when you're in gear 1 and you really need that sleep and that rest, you're not tempted. And so I guess I'm not sure if it was conscious or not. It sounds like you're really shaping your environments too to support the different gears that you need to be in.
Oh, 100%, 100%. I think it's a really wise. I love that you brought up environment shaping. I don't know, Caleb, sounds like you have little ones. Children it's so important what their environment looks and feels like. I don't know if you guys know anything about Montessori,
Mhm.
but in Montessori, the prepared environment is as important as the teacher. So they really think about and mindfully curate this space in order to allow the child to have the best experience with learning and foster learning in the way that it was intended to be.
And Montessori is also where everything is sort of the kids' size, right? So there's smaller tables. They're encouraged to be hands-on versus just a lecture or somebody talking to them, right?
Exactly right. Very experiential and there's not necessarily, I love this about Montessori, there's not necessarily an outcome. So if there's like a particular piece of work or a puzzle, the goal is not that they do the puzzle right. The work is investigating the pieces, and maybe that looks like stacking them on top of each other. So there's much less focus on what the outcome is, but more just you want to really get their hands and get interested in what's going on with a particular piece of work and investigate it truly the way a child naturally does. Kids are very good teachers in that way, that they just automatically want to learn and feel and touch and taste and dance their way to learning things.
Yeah,
For
we tend to get. I'm extremely analytical, so I live in my brain, and the whole Montessori thing is a newer concept to me. But I love conceptually what it stands for and what that does, because I think curiosity is incredible. And unfortunately, I feel that the older we get, the more we tend to move away from that curiosity. And when you see it in an adult, it's almost like it's refreshing. I was just hanging out with Bill. David and Matthew know him well. He's incredibly curious, and we go somewhere and he's got wide eyes and everything is just, wow, I can't believe that that's a thing. And it's like, oh, I wish I could see life more that way, because it really does make it way more interesting.
Sure does. So shifting gears a bit, Audrey, this practice of applying the 5 gears to really identify where you're at, and also again give yourself the rest, or I mean pretty much put yourself into whatever gear you need to be in at that moment. Who can benefit from this? Is this something that everyone should be applying to their life, or is this yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it has been so helpful for me. So I would say, moms, professionals, I can teach it to my kid. They're a little bit younger, but we talk about it with my children. And it's really fun to do the, like, we're in gear 3. Like, you can kind of like hand signal them. And I think it benefits everyone to just be a little bit more. It's almost like a mindfulness thing, right? Everyone's talking about mindfulness and meditation. And I think being aware of what gear we're in and is that the right gear for this particular scene that I'm in is really, really helpful. And I think that there isn't anyone who wouldn't benefit from this. I do really think that it's also really helpful to talk about it with your team members and learn how to understand other people's like gear order, so that, for example, my husband will, if I don't realize if I'm like edging on stress, and my husband can probably see it faster in me because I get a certain look in my eyes. He can call me out. So I think it's also really helpful to know other people's stress gears so that you can, gently nudge them or, for me, remind me to drink water or take a breath or go to sleep or eat something.
I love that there's a language around that as well. So when you can kind of say, "Hey, you're nudging up on gear 5 here," that kind of is a friendlier way of saying, "Hey, you're really stressed out. Take a chill pill." Like one of those is not going to be received nearly as well as the other.
Yeah, and I think the folks at Giant, Jeremy and Steve, bring this to companies, and it really helps teams work together better because they get to have the conversation about it and know, like, okay, this type of meeting or this particular setting that we're in, this is like a gear 2 time. We're going to connect. And they also have, if I can and plug them a little bit more, they
Please.
have the 5 voices, and the 5 voices is really different kind of personas that you can have, and different kinds of voices tend to be have, for example, there's a voice that isn't very heard in meetings. And so one of the things that they do, coupling these two kind of philosophies together, is to make sure that they always ask the person who's quietest in the room for their input to be added to, like, the circle of whatever is being spoken to. So I love them for doing that work.
And when you say Giant, I just Googled it. You're not talking the bicycle company. You're
No.
talking kind of an educational psychological group. Like what? Can you just
Yes.
give a 30-second overview of
Yes.
Giant?
Yeah. Giantworldwide.com is their website. And they really are intentional teachers that talk about leadership. And they have some really helpful tools like the 5 gears. Like, that's just scratching the surface, but they're extraordinary with what they put out. And their language also has a lot of visuals that go along with them. So I would encourage people to check them out, definitely. And they have books. The 5 gears and the 5 voices are super, super helpful.
Perfect. Well, we will link to those in the show notes as well, and we may have to go track them down and get them on a future episode. Maybe talk about the 5 voices.
Absolutely. I'll definitely connect you, and it's been a while since I've said hi, so it's a good reason to catch up.
Yeah, I am super intrigued. One more question there. I don't want to beat on 5 gears too much, but I love that we're just sort of kind of dwelling and focusing here. Are you familiar with Strengths Finders?
Oh, yes.
So yeah, I think we can nerd out over all kinds of things with Enneagram and
Well, if
whatnot.
we should get coffee, I would like
Let's,
this very
let's
much.
do it. So one of the core tenets of Strengths Finders is you're supposed to find what your 5 strengths are. I think it's a Gallup poll. I think there's 30 or 40 or 50 or whatever. But there's often a mentality in business to say, "Hey, I'm weak analytically or I'm weak socially," and the goal is to try and, bring up the floor levels of whatever your characteristics are. Strengths Finders sort of goes the opposite approach, and they say, "Hey, let's identify where you're incredibly strong and gifted, and let's find reasons and excuses to spend more time in your strengths, because that's where you're going to bring the best of you to the world." So my question is, do you have a feeling one way or the other on 5 gears? Is this more of a let's identify where you're weak and try and balance yourself out in those categories, or is it let's find where you are the strongest and find reasons to sort of park yourself in those categories?
A good question. I think with the gears, it's a little bit different than a personality. There's certainly some overlap. I think the 5 voices feels a little bit more like personality. The 5 gears is something that we should all be able to get to all of the gears. And I think it's really the focus of learning about that is understanding the gear that's maybe not utilized and needs to be utilized a little bit. So there's times in the day for all of these different gears, and for us to kind of, there can almost be rituals where you get into one, or set the environment so that you can get ready to get into gear 4. And there may be meetings where that's like totally appropriate if that's within your culture. I think it depends on the kind of culture, the kind of business, or the kind of home that you're in. I think what I've really benefited from is coming to terms with the fact that year 1 was so difficult for me. And I'll kind of tell the end of my story, which goes a little bit like this. Once I made friends with that gear and began to, like, really rest and notice and focus on that, I had an experience almost exactly a year later from my Denver Health Night. I was newly pregnant and I was on a work trip, and I, as it happened, had a miscarriage. I was staying at a hotel and had a meeting with my client that day, went home. Sorry to be graphic, but I had a miscarriage while, in the shower where I was. And it was incredibly eye opening. And suddenly I realized, like, it wasn't like, oh my God, this has happened. It was my first immediate thought was, oh my God, this has happened before. I've been here before. This is the second time. This is what happened before I went to Denver Health. I had had a miscarriage and completely hid it from myself. And I think our bodies are really interesting and sometimes hide things, we hide things from ourselves. And in that moment, my body hid something that was so difficult. I wasn't ready to deal with it. I didn't talk about it. I couldn't even tell my husband. Like, I didn't have the words. I couldn't tell myself. I was so sad and disappointed that I literally shoved it down and just started working, you know? And I think that's what we do in these moments of stress is we go to whatever gear is our stress gear. So my second miscarriage I look at as this tremendous blessing because it was this moment of awareness where I got to deal very differently. And I came home from that work trip and I scheduled some time off. I immediately booked appointments with my therapist, my doctor, and I talked about it. And I think that really, the 5 gears, the strength finders, I think all of these are tools to get us a little bit more self-aware. And it's not really about being in a box or a container, but it's about understanding yourself really well. And I learned that my body can literally, my brain sometimes hides itself really difficult truths. So that was a huge awareness moment for me. And I went from being like really afraid of my brain, like, oh my God, am I crazy? To like, holy smokes, my brain protected me. I couldn't handle what was going on. And my brain knew how to protect me in that moment. And my body protected me. And I think since then, like you guys talked a lot about, like, one of the reasons you aren't drinking is it doesn't feel good in your body. And I think I have learned through the 5 gears to have a really different relationship to not only my mind and how I'm wired, but my relationship with my body. And I think that self-awareness is all of these tools just get us a little bit more self-aware. And that becomes almost fascinating to like learn to make friends with yourself and learn, oh yeah, I'm doing that adorable thing again where I like go into gear 5 and instead of getting frustrated, be really gentle and kind and be like, I probably need a big glass of water and maybe a hug and to go chill out or take a walk.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing those hard moments. And it's not lost on me. You had 2 miscarriages, and now you've been blessed with twins.
I did, yeah. And
So I think as you've been learning to be more in touch with yourself, your emotions, your body, I think God or the universe or whatever you want to call it has said, "All right, Audrey, you're ready. We're gonna give you a double blessing, and you still got a lot of work to do. It sounds like we all do, but that's, man, what a story."
Yeah.
Audrey, I really appreciate you telling your story and just giving us insight on the 5 gears and how it's improved your life. I can see immediate impact on my own life by applying a lot of these ideas. And so really, thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah. Thank you guys for creating a space to talk about it. I think that's huge.
It's our pleasure. We're still learning what this looks like. Habits, like you mentioned, they do become an automatic part of your life, but there is intentionality involved in saying, "Hey, here's a spot. I've hit rock bottom." Or in your case, you didn't even notice it. A friend pulled you aside and said, "Hey, I think you're pushing a little too hard." So, just an encouragement, whether you're self-aware, whether you're listening to this, if you are aware enough of yourself to kind of raise the flag and say, "Hey, I need a little bit of help," and check in. I think that's great. And alternatively, sometimes, or actually most of the time, it's easier to see things in other people than it is in ourselves. So if you see someone else struggling or burned out or stuck somewhere, feel free to just toss them a copy of 5 Gears and say, "Hey, moron, read this." Whatever gentle love looks like to you. So we will link to the book. I'm curious. I definitely want to read it, and I would love to have the authors on and maybe talk through the next step of the 5 voices. But Audrey, if people are listening and do want to find you, if you're open to being found, how would people do that?
Well, one of my other interesting habits is I'm not really on the social media. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's about it. I think there may be an Instagram account, but I haven't posted or been on in a long time. But a couple of things I'm working on is a mental health 101 course that I lead with my dear colleague, Carrie Ladd from Well Power. So if you're in the Denver area, or if you are interested in having an honest talk about mental health, and I think one of the things you said, Caleb, was so brilliant is, what do you do when someone else is struggling? And that's what Mental Health 101 is really about. So you can check me out there. And then I'll be posting a course with one of my amazing mentors in the product space. She actually has a new product called superproduct.tech. And I'll be doing a course. She has an amazing course, by the way, on how to use AI for product owners. So you get like all the cheap prompts to get your product out. And I'll be doing a course around burnout for people in the product space, because I think product owners are often like right in the middle of everyone. And that's a particularly difficult position to be in a company. So that'll be coming out soon. But thanks for asking, Caleb. And thanks for
Sure. Well,
having me.
yeah, thanks so much for coming on. We will link to all those below. It's obvious you have a lot of energy, a lot of passion, and I'm super intrigued. So thanks for bringing this habit to our attention. And be sure to tune in next week as we find our next fantastic guest. So thanks, Audrey, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, you guys bet. Lots of love. We appreciate you.